Now we're on the last video for Module 2, Topic 4, and the last video of the entire Module 2, which I'm thankful for. So in the last video, I talked about community ecology, the types of species interactions, told you about how they are sort of organized or defined by how they can benefit one species and negatively impact the other, or the different combinations of benefits and costs to the different species that are interacting. So then I spent some time talking about competition, which can be defined by individuals attempting to gain access to some limited resource, and the individuals who are interacting are both being negatively impacted. So now we're going to spend some time talking about the other types of interactions, including predation and the three types of symbiosis. Predation is a pretty obvious one. I'm guessing you don't really need to have this defined, but we're going to anyway. Predation is when one organism, the predator, captures and feeds upon another organism, the prey. Now there are some subtleties here which we will talk about when we start talking about parasitism, but typically the entire prey organism is consumed by the predator. If we want to look at how the costs and benefits are in terms of the species interaction, one species is benefited, that would be the predator, and the other species that's captured, killed, and eaten, that species has a negative impact, and so that would be the prey. In this case, this is a cormorant being the predator, and this fish, pike or something, being the prey. One common theme when we are talking about predation is the interesting relationships that predator and prey have with one another in nature. So often, the predator-prey interactions result in populations of the two species cycling with one another. So this is a classic example of a hare population, which is like a type of a lagomorph, like a rabbit, and the lynx population, which is a predatory cat. I cannot remember where exactly this study took place, but it's not super important. But over several decades, people would take population numbers of the hares and of the lynx and plot it on a graph. And so what they found was that these two cycles, this is for the hare, I'm sorry, this is for the predator, this is for the lynx, the red one is for the lynx, and the blue one is for the hare, that these seem to be kind of mostly in sync with one another. So let's talk about how that happens and which species seems to be ahead of the other one. Remember, time is going in this direction, so this is the longest time away, and this is the more recent time. So actually, let's go over here and look at the cycle and how this works. The predator and prey population cycles together, and what happens if the prey population decreases. So here we have a normal prey population. We're going to start there. Assuming we have predators eating them, the prey population decreases. Okay, so once the prey population decreases because the predators are eating them, then the predator population decreases because there's not a lot of food. We assume that the predators don't eat all of the prey. Okay, so while the population decreases, they don't go locally extinct because there's places for the rabbit, the hares to hide. They can find shelter, so some of them survive. But once the prey population goes down, the predator population goes down. And when the predator population goes down, the prey population increases again because there's not as many predators coming out to attack them, and they can reproduce and their numbers grow again. As those numbers grow, the predator population increases because there's more food for them, and so the cycle continues. The more predators there are, now the prey population decreases again. So this is the cycle that we're talking about, And here's how it plays out over here. So we're going to start here because these tend to be a little bit more clear than the ones before. So remember, the blue is the prey population. This is the hare. So you have low predator right here. And when the predator population is low, the prey population increases. As the prey population increases, the predator population increases, and you get a decrease in the prey population when the predator population is really high. Well, when the prey population gets low, the predator population also decreases. Now the prey population can get high again. Once it's high, the predator population goes up. So that's how this cycle works. And typically you can think of the prey population is leading the predator population. Prey population increases, then the predator population increases. Prey population decreases, predator population decreases. So that's the way the predator-prey cycle works. Under normal circumstances in nature, this is very, very typical. And you see this cyclic type of relationship as long as you have a close predator-prey relationship between two species. It gets more complicated if there's lots of different prey species, or if they have a whole bunch of lots of different predator species, or if they have a whole bunch of different prey species to choose from, then you're not going to see this closely linked cycle. But when there's typically one predator and one prey item or one main prey item in the system, then you're going to get this close relationship between the population numbers. So remember, I mentioned that the predators don't eat all of the prey in a normal situation, because some of the prey can escape, they can find shelter, and the predator population will decrease before the prey population goes extinct. But if you stick a predator and a prey, let's say that paramecium and bacteria, in a petri dish, and there's no place for bacteria to gain shelter from the paramecium, then you get a relationship that looks like this. You add the prey first. These would be the bacteria in this case. They've got some resources to eat, so they increase in numbers. And if you add a predator here, you see that the predators will increase in numbers as they're consuming the prey, and then the prey population will completely crash to zero if they've got no shelter, nowhere to hide, nowhere to escape. And then the predator population also will crash. So predators and prey kind of rely on each other to maintain both species. Now we're going to talk about symbiosis, and I haven't really defined symbiosis yet. There's some misconceptions about this word. A lot of people think that symbiosis means that two species live together in a relationship where both species benefit. But that's really just one type of symbiosis. Symbiosis is really the relationship between two different organisms that are living together in close association. So in some cases, both species can benefit, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's not a requirement for symbiosis. Okay, so symbiosis just means that two species are living in close association with one another. And then there's three different categories of symbiosis: commensalism, mutualism, and parasitism. If we start with mutualism, I think that was the first one in the table that we talked about in the last video. Mutualism is the thing that most people, or many people, confuse with symbiosis. So again, mutualism, these are all different types of symbiosis, but mutualism is the one in which both species benefit. So if we wanted to include the symbiotic part of the definition, we would say that mutualism is a close association between two species in which both species benefit. A very typical and common example for mutualism is a sea anemone and a clownfish. The sea anemone is it's closely related to a jellyfish, actually, so it's got all these stinging cells at the ends of its tentacles, and these are used to capture fish and to basically sting them and poison them, and then the anemone will move the fish prey into its mouth. But the clownfish actually has some adaptations that make it so that the anemone doesn't harm it. I believe that's in one of the videos that I'm going to have you watch as part of your activities. So the benefit to the clownfish is that it gets shelter. No one's going to mess with it if it's hanging out within a sea anemone. And the benefit that the sea anemone gets is that if there are fish that are hanging out in here, other fish predators might get close to this clownfish, and then the sea anemone might be able to procure another meal because some fish are attracted to the fact that there are clownfish hanging out there. Some people will argue that this relationship, the sea anemone and clownfish, is not a mutualism, but is more like a commensalism. So they would argue that the clownfish is getting a benefit, but the sea anemone isn't. So it really just depends on how you want to make your argument. I would be okay if you used the sea anemone and clownfish as a commensal example, as long as you were clear as to why you think it's a commensalistic relationship. But there's all kinds of other mutualisms, like pollinators and their flowers. So like bees will get nectar and from a flower. The bees will then bring the nectar back, which they use to make honey, and they also eat the nectar for energy. So they're getting that from the flower, and the flower is putting pollen onto the bee. And when the bee visits multiple plants, the pollen gets transferred to the female parts of another plant. And so basically the flowers use bees to complete sexual reproduction. So the bees basically transport the sperm of the flower, which is within the pollen, to the female parts of another flower. And that's how flowers make seeds. Many flowers need pollinators like bees. So in that case, pollinators typically are a great example of mutualism, pollinators and the flowers that they visit. Okay, so now we're going to go to commensalism, where one species benefits and one species is unharmed. And again, if we want to make sure we're including that symbiotic component of the relationship, it is a close association between two species where one species benefits and one is unharmed. So here's an example of a commensalistic or commensal relationship between a scallop and barnacles. So the scallop is a bivalve. It's like a clam. They don't really move around very much. They don't, and they're not affected by barnacles. So barnacles are crustaceans, actually. So they are oddly kind of related to crabs, and they can attach to something like a scallop, and the scallop provides them a safe place to attach, and the scallop is not harmed at all. Okay, and parasitism is, again, if we want to include the symbiotic aspect of it, close relationship between two species where one species benefits and one is harmed. So I don't actually like this example of a mosquito on skin, although it gets used a lot as parasitism. The reason I don't like it is because mosquitoes don't have a close relationship with humans. They don't live together closely. They don't spend a lot of time together. But one aspect of parasitism that mosquitoes do exhibit is that in parasitism, the individual or the species that's benefiting typically does not kill its host. So the species that is harmed a little bit, but it's not killed. So if you remember, in predation, it's the same kind of relationship where one species benefits, one is harmed, but in predation, by definition, the predator kills the prey species, and that is not the case for parasitism. A better example of parasitism, though, that sort of accomplishes all of these things would be maybe like a tick on a human or a tick on a dog, where that's a close association. So they are actually, the tick is actually living on the skin of the dog for an extended period of time. The parasite feeds on the host, and the host is where the parasite lives, at least for some amount of time. And again, one condition is that the host doesn't die from the interaction with the parasite. But these three, commensalism, mutualism, and parasitism, are all symbiotic relationships because they include a close association between two species. I think I've touched on this already. What's the difference between predation and parasitism? But it's an important distinction, so I want to talk about it a little bit more. Both have a positive effect on one organism and a negative effect on the other. But the main differences are that parasites have close relationships with their host, and predators do not. Prey items do not. And predators always kill their prey, while parasites rarely kill their hosts. So those are the two main ways that we can tell the difference between predation and parasitism, even though the mechanics of the relationship with one getting a benefit and one being negatively affected, those are the same between those two species interactions. So that is the end of the community ecology lectures, and that is the end of the videos for Module 2.